Welcome to Reality, Mortality, Murder, and Madness, a personal and psychological view of Hamlet. I'm Steve Bank, and I've invited Marcella Trowbridge to offer her insights into how actors bring Shakespeare's characters to life. She's literally inhabited the role of Hamlet. First, I want to offer you some ideas about enjoying this remarkable play. The COVID pandemic has closed every theater in America, so you aren't going to see a live production right now. Well, that would be ideal. But we have much in common with theater goers in Shakespeare's time. When Hamlet was being performed in 1603, public gatherings were forbidden because plague hit England full force. But fortunately, you can watch one of the many filmed Hamlets on Netflix or Prime Video. I recommend several movies featuring as Hamlet, Mel Gibson, Kenneth Branagh, Derek Jacobi, David Tennant, or Christopher Plummer. Be sure to turn on the English subtitles so you're not stymied by the early modern English. Hamlet is meant to be seen and heard. Without seeing the action and hearing the dramatic voices, it just sounds like words, words, and more words. No two productions are alike. If you're super interested, you can watch two for comparison. And of course, you'll want to read a play. A good resource is Cliff's Complete Hamlet. It explains many of the unique words that modern theatergoers have trouble understanding. It gives good information about the plot, about Shakespeare's life, plus the political and religious conflicts of that era. Read the synopsis before tackling the text, and it's well worth the $11.95. To appreciate the powerful language, you should read it slowly. The words are magical, but when spoken, they go flying by like hummingbirds, beautiful, but gone before you can appreciate their beauty. I've read this play dozens of times, seen many performances, and yet I still discover phrases that take on new meanings. Some people admire Shakespeare but won't go to performances because they find it too confusing. I have two friends. One is a talented mathematician. He loves opera, classical music, and goes to serious theater. He tells me, Shakespeare goes right over my head. My other friend has published dozens of short stories in prestigious literary magazines. He tells me flat out, I hate Shakespeare. Well, they're not alone. Leo Tolstoy railed against the false glorification of Shakespeare. Tolstoy found his language exaggerated. He viewed Shakespeare's plays as cultural vaccinations administered without consent. To those of you who suffer from a touch of bardophobia, I say chill, relax. Don't try to understand every word. You don't need a PhD in English Lit to enjoy Hamlet. The powerful story will carry you along. So let me tell you a bit about who I am and who I'm not. I am not a literary scholar. I'm not an English professor. But for 50 years, I've been a clinical psychologist in private practice. I've done intensive therapy with children, young adults, and their parents, individual adults, and entire families. This work is a great privilege. It's given me an opportunity to understand how people really feel. It's provided an intimate acquaintance with their darkest moments. Psychotherapy helps people to shed their masks and illusions. It helps people unload their most tightly held fears and secrets. And when it succeeds, people can live more authentically. They can summon the courage to make difficult choices. Psychotherapy asks difficult questions, and here is where Hamlet comes in. Hamlet asks some of the same difficult questions. What is the meaning of my life? Who am I? Am I being honest with myself? Am I being honest with other people? What's real? What's fake? Why am I living in fear? Human beings are complicated, and we're sometimes ruled by forces we can't understand. I believe that Shakespeare's Hamlet is equal to the task of fathoming the complex motives and doubts and passions of its characters, and by transposition to our own lives. This play, like no other, gives us a vivid glimpse of the inner lives of its characters and the nasty nuances of family relationships. I wish I'd studied Hamlet in graduate school. It should be part of every psychotherapist's education. Now, my purpose today is not to put Hamlet on the proverbial analyst's couch, but to use Hamlet as a window into understanding ourselves. When students ask, "What does Hamlet have to do with me?" my reply is always, Hamlet has everything to do with you. It's as personal as you will allow it to be. The title of this presentation is A Personal and Psychological Approach. First, the personal. I'd like to share with you an emotionally charged encounter from my work as a therapist. I was 60 years old. This incident propelled me into a 15-year-long immersion in Hamlet. A 15-year-old boy, the son of a minister, was referred to me after his father died. In the boy's presence, after the very first argument they had ever had, the boy idolized his father. They adored one another. But on this one day, the father, whose disposition was generally sunny, was in a bad mood. He screamed at his son about being too lazy to move a piece of furniture. The boy blew up and told his father, "You can go straight to hell." Well, minutes later, the father fell to the floor and died in front of his son with a heart attack. The young man was numb with inexpressible grief, unable to deal with the tangled emotions that occur when an event like this happens. His hero had vanished in an instant. Unfortunately, my best therapeutic efforts failed to unfreeze him. "Do you believe you killed your dad with your anger?" "No, he would have died anyway." "Are you upset that he was mad at you?" "So what? Feeling guilty can't bring him back." "Do you feel guilty about telling him off?" "I have no idea. Anyway, he's dead. Let's move on." Everything was still choked within, so we talked about superficial things like baseball and girls and school. He was the master of emotional evasion. His mother felt at least there was a man in his life, and that was me, but that was not the outcome I was hoping for. In our final meeting, he proudly rolled up his sleeve to display a tattoo he had paid with his own money. On his arm was imprinted a blood-stained gravestone with the father's initials and dates of birth and death. Hovering above were the words, "Rest in peace." On the way out, he asked me, "Have you ever seen Hamlet?" I nodded, yes. His face lit up. It was the first time I'd ever seen him smile. "Dr. Bank, you've got to see the movie. Mel Gibson plays Hamlet. It's the coolest story." Well, sadly, we never got to unpack his grief, but I've always wondered if Hamlet's grief for his father had helped this young man feel less alone. At that point, I ordered a copy of the Gibson DVD, and I got hooked on Hamlet. So let's go inside the play now and discuss some of the basic ideas. First, Hamlet is all about uncertainty. Uncertainty, that's a word we're using a lot today. Uncertainty makes us feel uncomfortable. Uncertainty breeds suspicion and mistrust. And there's plenty of suspicion and mistrust in Hamlet. Take this example from the final act. Hamlet is speaking to his friend Horatio. Horatio warns him, "Hamlet, you don't have a chance to win the sword fight with Laertes. The dice are loaded." Hamlet answers, "We defy augury." Augury, by the way, was the Roman custom of disemboweling an animal to see which way the entrails would fall, and a priest would use this to forecast the future. "We defy augury." There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. I'll read it again. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Now, what does Hamlet mean by this cloudy statement? If it be not now, yet it will come? Is he referring to dying? Or is this a release from the Center for Disease Control? The readiness is all? Readiness for what? I read this statement during the pandemic, a time when we're all living under a dark cloud of uncertainty. When will we have a vaccine? We have no idea about when we can see our children or our parents or our grandparents. Most of us don't know if we'll even have a job. Hamlet says, the time is out of joint. We hate uncertainty. We read polls. We collect data, make forecasts. We turn to prophets and pundits and op-ed writers. On matters that really count, we itch to know exactly what's going to happen, when it will happen, where it will happen, how it will happen, and to whom. Not knowing gives life its drama, but it makes us feel unsafe. Uncertainty lurks in the stone battlements of Elsinore Castle. The Danes anticipate an attack by Norway. A sentry shouts, "Who's there? Is it a spy? Is it a friend?" Uncertainty opens the gate to anxiety, and there's anxiety woven into every act and every scene of Hamlet. Who can he trust? Friends or foes? Hamlet says regarding his perfidious college buddies, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, "I trust them as I would adders fanged." Hamlet calls Denmark a prison. He can't escape. He's cut off from the corrective influences of the outside world. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. It is. But what exactly is it? The most important uncertainty is this. Is his father's ghost the devil? Or could it be a figment of a young man's overactive imagination? Is the ghost real? Now, I'd like to say a word about ghosts. In Shakespeare's time, ghosts were believed in. They were believable. Ghosts were feared and respected by virtually everyone. While only a small percentage of people today believe in ghosts, many of us are haunted by vivid encounters with our deceased parents when we are asleep. We also have conversations with people long gone, not only when we're asleep, but when we're awake. My sister's husband died a few years ago. She tells me she talks with Jack every day. She asks his advice. She follows his advice. Have you recently had a conversation or an encounter in your head with somebody dead? If your answer is yes, you may be able to understand Hamlet and his vivid connection with his father's ghost. Now, in everyday life, we can be persuaded to doubt what our senses tell us. Here's the famous experiment invented by the social psychologist Solomon Asch. Look at these lines, and which comparison line is equal to the regular line? If you answered 2, you are correct. It's the same length as the standard line. Dr. Asch wanted to study how social pressure affects something as simple as what we see. The unsuspecting subject is told that he or she will be taking part in a vision test. This is not true. The subject enters a room with 9 chairs, 8 are occupied. He or she sits in an empty chair. The people already seated are in cahoots with the experimenter. They've been coached to say 2, which is the correct answer. The unsuspecting subject goes last, and 98% of these subjects choose the same length, no problem. But in the next experiment, the unsuspecting subject goes last again. A new set of lines, this time 2 of them horizontally. Now the lines are exactly the same length. The 8 Confederates now say the lower line is longer. 35% of the subjects in experiment after experiment that's been replicated hundreds of times will say the lower line is longer. They go along with the lie. They conform. Now, in the third experiment, if only one Confederate judge's one line is longer, the chance of making a wrong judgment falls dramatically below 10%. If you have only one ally, you can stick to what your eyes and ears tell you. Hamlet has one ally, Horatio, and he validates Hamlet's feelings, so Hamlet can stick to his guns no matter how much his family manipulates him. Do you remember the movie called Gaslight? It featured Ingrid Bergman as the bewildered wife trapped in a marriage to a man, Charles Boyer, who tries to drive her insane by secretly raising or lowering the lights, which are fueled by gas. When she complains, he tells her she's crazy. What pulls her back from the brink of insanity is Inspector Joseph Cotton, who proves to her that someone has been tampering with a gas nozzle. She reclaims her sanity, and her husband is arrested. So much for conformity. Let's go to the first act to look at conformity. Hamlet's stepfather, Claudius, and his mother, Gertrude, want him to submerge his grief, to forget his father's death. In other words, grow up, suck it up, get on with living. It's a perfect example of a family pressuring a young person to conform, to deny the reality of feelings. His mother chimes in a saccharine tone of voice, "Good Hamlet, cast thy nighted color off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou know'st 'tis common, all that live must die." Look like a friend on Denmark? What's the subtext? Subtext, you are an enemy of the state if you persist in grieving. But Hamlet possesses a laser-like focus on the emotional truth. He replies cynically, "Aye, madam, it is common." His mother relentlessly pursues him. If it be common, why seems it so particular with thee? He knows the difference between inner reality and outward appearance. To borrow a phrase from the social psychologist Carl Scheibe, this Danish court is a culture of masks, mirrors, lies, and secrets. Hamlet replies, "'Tis not my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, nor the fruitful river in the eye, nor the dejected behavior of the visage that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for they are the actions that a man might play. But I have that within which passeth show. These are the trappings and the suits of woe." Now listen while lies, half-truths, denial, and insincerity gulf young Hamlet. We're at the great hall of Elsinore Castle. Assembled are the courtiers, lackeys, and the political elite. Hamlet will be put on the spot if he disagrees. It's a public event. He paces, glowering in the shadows. See if you can detect the lies and distortions. And now, Marcella Trowbridge and I will read the scene out loud. See if you can identify the ways in which the king and queen pressure Hamlet. I'll do the king, Marcella will do both Hamlet and the queen. "Though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green, and that it is us befitted to bear our hearts in grief, and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature, that we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrance of ourselves. Therefore, our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress to this warlike state, have we, as 'twere, with a defeated joy, with one auspicious and one dropping eye, with mirth in funeral and dirge in marriage, in equal scale weighing delight and dole, taken to wife. Nor have we herein barred your better wisdoms, which have freely gone with this affair along, for all our thanks. But now, my cousin, Hamlet and my son."
A little more than kin and less than kind.
How is it that the clouds still hang on you?
Not so much, my lord, but I am too much i' the sun. Good Hamlet, cast thy nighted colour off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou know'st 'tis common, all that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. Aye, madam, it is common. If it be, why seems it so particular with thee? Seems? Madam, nay, it is, I know not. Seems, 'tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath. No, nor the fruitful river in the eye, nor the dejected haviour of the visage, together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for they are actions that a man might play. But I have that within which passeth show. These but the trappings and the suits of woe.
'Tis sweet and commendable in your nature, Hamlet, to give these morning duties to your father, but you must know your father lost a father. That father lost his, and the survivor bound in filial obligation for some term to do obsequious sorrow, but to persevere in obstinate condolement is a course of impious stubbornness. 'Tis unmanly grief. It shows a will most incorrect to heaven, a heart unfortified, a mind impatient, an understanding simple and unschooled, for what we know must be said and is as common as any the most vulgar thing to sense. Why should we take it in our peevish opposition, take it to heart? Fie, 'tis a fault to heaven, a fault against the dead, a fault to nature, to reason most absurd, whose common theme is the death of fathers, and who hath cried from the first course that he died today, this must be so. We pray you, throw to earth this unprevailing woe, and think of us as of a father, for let the world take note. You are the most immediate to our throne, and with no less nobility of love than that which dearest father bears his son, do I impart to you. For your intent in going back to school in Wittenberg is most retrograde to our desire, and we beseech you, bend you to remain here in the cheer and comfort of our eye, our chiefest courtier, cousin, and our son.
Let not thy mother lose her prayers, Hamlet. I pray thee, stay with us. Go not to Wittenberg. I shall, in all my best, obey you, madam.
Why, 'tis a loving and fair reply. Be as ourself in Denmark. Madam, come, this gentle and enforced chord of Hamlet fits smiling to my heart. Let's go through the scene, line by line. King, though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green. Dear brother? Claudius murdered his brother. Memory be green? He subtly implies that Hamlet is still mourning his father, while normal people, including his mother, are moving ahead. And that it is befitted of us to bear our hearts in grief and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. Subtext, befitted? Does this suggest that Claudius and Gertrude and the entire Danish nation have been following the rituals of mourning because custom requires it, not because they're sad. That we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrance of ourselves. Wisest sorrow? Think? Sorrow isn't something you think, it's a feeling. Together with remembrance of ourselves. Subtext, life goes on, get over it. Therefore, our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress to this warlike state. Sister, oh, come on now. She's your murdered brother's wife. Now our queen? She's always been the queen. Have we, as 'twere with a defeated joy, with one auspicious and one dropping eye, with mirth in funeral and dirge in marriage, in equal scale weighing delight and dole, taken to wife, mirth in funeral, woe is equal to delight? Grief has to be neutralized by this new marriage. That's what it says. Claudius has just given permission for Laertes, the son of the sycophant Polonius, to leave Denmark to go to France to enjoy the sights, the wine, and the women in Paris. This allows Laertes his freedom amidst the threat of mobilization and a war with Norway. He's allowed to be a draft dodger and a playboy, but Hamlet is granted no such privilege. He can't go back to Wittenberg. Claudius and mother pressure him to interrupt his college education and remain with them. King, for your intent in going back to Wittenberg, it is most retrograde to our desire. Remain here in the cheer and comfort of our eye. Cheer and comfort? Nonsense. Claudius wants to keep an eye on Hamlet just in case he challenges him for this throne. Cheer and comfort? They know he's uncomfortable seeing this new marriage. Gertrude piles on the pressure. Let your mother lose not her prayers, Hamlet. Stay with us. Go not to Wittenberg. Oh, wouldn't a caring mother encourage her son to go back to college? Cast thy nighted color off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou knowest 'tis common, and all must die. Common? Subtext, does she mean her son is lower class if he doesn't stay home? Like a friend on Denmark? You are the enemy of Denmark if you persist in grieving? His mother pursues him relentlessly, insisting he deny his feelings for his father. Aye, why? So seems it so particular with thee? Aye, 'tis common. He's disgusted with appearances, defends his right to grieve, and he proves masterful at countering manipulation. Listen to Hamlet fighting for the truth. I'll read it again. Seems, madam, seems? Nay, it is. I know not seems. 'Tis not my inky cloak, good mother, nor suits of solemn black together with the shows of grief. These indeed seem, for these are the actions that a man might play. But I have that within which passeth show. These but the trappings and the suits of woe. His selfish uncle takes Hamlet on a guilt trip. He tells Hamlet he's being obstinate, that everyone loses a father. It's an insult to God to do obsequious sorrow, a weakness of the will. It's an insult to the dead. Subtext, only stupid people keep grieving. You're being unreasonable. Hamlet finally gives in. He agrees to stay home. Stepfather says, oh, 'tis a loving and fair reply. Well, it is not a fair reply, and it is not loving. It's an angry young man being shamed and manipulated by his family. This parental attempt to nullify an adult child's feelings strongly appeals to my experiences as a family therapist. I've met countless young people whose parents shame and blame them for what they feel. It's a form of brainwashing. The effects of this are to enrage the young person, to cut away his self-confidence, or to produce depression, hopelessness, rage, or rebellion. Many people don't have Hamlet's strength of character or his ability to resist powerful parents. So who is the real Hamlet? Is he crazy? Is he what they used to call mad? Mark Van Doren, a scholar at Columbia many years ago, wrote, "He has been called the best of men and the worst of men. One judgment is just as good as the other. Scarcely anything can be said that will be untrue of this brilliant, abounding young man." Hamlet tells the audience he'll fake mental illness. He puts on a, quote, antic disposition. But there are moments when we think he might not be in his right mind. We hear him eloquently soliloquizing to be or not to be, and minutes later, Hamlet unleashes a torrent of rage and abuse at his teenage girlfriend. We never know which Hamlet is going to show up. Is he an indecisive, spineless young man whose will is paralyzed by too much thinking? Or is he decisively working out a plan to expose his uncle's crime? Is he suicidal, clinically depressed? When he says, "Lately I have lost all my mirth. The world seems to be a sterile promontory." Freud called that kind of talk a sign of melancholia, what today we call major depression. Is he mentally ill when Ophelia reports, "As I was sewing in my closet, Lord Hamlet, his stockings fouled, ungartered and downjived to his ankle, pale as his shirt, his knees knocking each other, and with a look so piteous, as if he had been loosed out of hell." Well, is this description of a madman or of a person who's faking an antic disposition? Is he a serial killer, directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of 7 people, Polonius, Ophelia, Laertes, Gertrude, Claudius, as well as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? Or instead, is he the sensitive poet who speaks soulfully? His public identity seems to change from minute to minute. Hamlet is a kaleidoscope, a chameleon, a king of masks. A key to the diagnosis of genuine impairment or mental illness is the distinction between state and trait. The description I just quoted from Ophelia could be just a state, a temporary and rare piece of evidence about mental instability. A one-time thing. A trait is different. A trait is more lasting and can be reliably observed in a variety of situations over a longer period of time. Fortunately, today we have some agreement as to what is and what is not mental illness. Take a look at the diagnostic manual of the American Psychiatric Association. It's called the DSM-5. What several words would you choose to define Hamlet's character? Character is defined as a set of unchanging traits, attitudes, and behaviors that accompany you throughout life. Try to describe his character. If you can't, you're in good company. Scholars have been arguing about this basic character for years. When people fear you, or hate you, or distrust you, or are offended by you and your political beliefs, you can be tarred with the brush of so-called insanity. Madness can be a social construction aimed at people we don't like, who make us feel uncomfortable. In the Soviet Union during the 1950s, Stalin not only assassinated his opponents, he had them locked up in mental hospitals. One of my colleagues, Daniel Miller, asked several female graduate students wearing disheveled clothing to enter various stores. They said nothing, stared unblinking at the clerks at the checkout counters. Each woman twirled a parasol. They broke no laws. They just stood there staring into space, saying nothing. The police were usually summoned or tried to refer these women to mental health professionals. In another experiment created by psychologist Robert Rosenhan, 7 healthy young adults volunteered to present themselves for admission at various mental hospitals. They reported only one problem: hearing strange sounds like thud. All were admitted. So how can we tell the difference between real and faked mental illness? I suggest you watch Ophelia's mad scene. Compare it with what you see in Hamlet's antic disposition. Now let's move on to mortality, to be or not to be. Hamlet is loaded with concerns about mortality, the awareness that our death is inevitable, that one is living on borrowed time. Shakespeare and his audiences were well acquainted with mortality. 30% of all babies born in the 1600s died before the age of 3. Average lifespan, 40 years. There were so many ways your life could get short. Sanitation was poor. Typhoid, typhus, cholera, diphtheria, smallpox, tuberculosis, and pneumonia were rampant. No immunizations, no antibiotics. Shakespeare's audiences feared the plague, a painful, disfiguring disease transmitted to humans by fleas and rats. It killed most of its victims. And in Stratford, the poet's birthplace, plague killed 200 people in the year he was born. In 1599, when Hamlet was first performed on the stage, they knew exactly what was meant by the epithet, "a plague upon thee." The awareness of death was omnipresent. With the pandemic today, we are more aware of death than at any time in the last 100 years. Now, I can't imagine a better place to consider mortality than a graveyard. In the final act, Hamlet has just returned from England, where he's foiled the attempt of his perfidious friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to have him murdered. Joined by friend Horatio, he comes upon 2 laborers preparing a grave for Ophelia, who has committed suicide. It's a stark, dark scene with a few touches of comic relief. Marcella will give you the graveyard scene.
Why may not that be the skull of a lawyer? Where be his quiddities now? His quillets, his cases, his tenures, and his tricks? Why does he suffer this rude knave now to knock him about the sconce with a dirty shovel, and will not tell him of his action of battery? Ha! This fellow might be in time a great buyer of land, with his statutes, his recognizances, his fines, his double vouchers, his recoveries. Is this the fine of his fines, and the recovery of his recoveries, to have his fine pate full of fine dirt? Will his vouchers vouch him no more of his purchases, and double ones too, than the length and breadth of a pair of indentures? The very conveyances of his lands will hardly lie in this box. And must the inheritor himself have no more? Huh? Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of fine jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. And now, how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rims at it. Here hung those lips that I have kissed, I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now? Your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roll? Not one now? To mock your own grinning, quite chop fallen.
To what base uses may we return, Horatio? Why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till he find it stopping a bunghole? Alexander died. Alexander was buried. Alexander returneth into dust. The dust is earth. Of earth we make loam. And why of that loam, whereto he was converted, might they not stop a beer barrel? Imperious Caesar, dead and turned to clay, might stop a hole to keep the wind away. Oh, that the earth, which kept the world in awe, should patch a wall to expel the winter's flaw. But soft aside. Here comes the king.
So, you live, you die, you rot, you get recycled. Period. End of report. Shakespeare uses vivid, gruesome words as if to push the reality of death right in your face. Let's take another example. Hamlet has just killed Polonius in his mom's bedroom. He drags the body to a hidden room. Hamlet taunts the king. King, now Hamlet, where's Polonius? Hamlet, at supper. King, at supper, where? Hamlet, not where he eats, but where he is eaten. A certain convocation of politic worms are at him. Your worm is your only emperor for diet. We fat all creatures else to fat us, and we fat ourselves for maggots. King, where is Polonius? Hamlet, indeed, if you find him not within this month, you shall nose him as you go up the stairs into the lobby. The ultimate statement about mortality comes to us via Hamlet's famous soliloquy, to be or not to be. It is one of his 7 soliloquies. You can read them with commentary on how great actors have performed them. I recommend the book Modern Hamlets and Their Soliloquies. It features actors, famed actors, who've played the role of Hamlet discussing their interpretations. Soliloquy means speaking to oneself. To be or not to be is the most famous question in the entire English language. We all have private conversations with ourselves. Shakespeare uses the soliloquy to let us in on his character's secret thoughts. This is not a guide filled with self-help or tips on how to live. It's a searching meditation about the meaning or meaninglessness of our lives. Some scholars credit Shakespeare with being the father of existentialism. 3 centuries before the rise of existential philosophy, Hamlet asked existential questions like these. Why not commit suicide? What's the meaning of my life? Is it worth it to struggle in a cruel, uncaring world? This is the core of existentialism. You are free to determine your fate. It's up to you, the individual. No excuses, no intelligent design, no God, no savior. The existentialist Albert Camus said that we live beneath the benign indifference of the stars. And for the existentialist, the worst thing is to be a passive bystander, to fail to act against evil. Hamlet roundly condemns himself for failing to take action against his bad uncle. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I! I, a dull and multi-mettled rascal, pregnant of my cause, can say nothing. No, not for a king upon whose life a damned defeat was made. I am pigeon-livered and lack gall. For the existentialist and Hamlet, passivity in the face of evil is not acceptable. Stated differently, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. This is powerful poetry. It's dense and intense. Scholars and philosophers have been fighting about its meaning for centuries. Read it slowly. Read it aloud. See if you can discover a few phrases that connect with your own personal experience. Let's watch Marcella Trowbridge, who has performed Hamlet in the title role.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of trouble and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time that presses wrong the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the threat of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment in this regard, their currents turn awry and lose the name of action.
Hamlet's soliloquy affects different listeners in different ways at different stages of their lives. I've seen it performed by a very thoughtful 13-year-old. He and his classmates did an abridged version of the play. They understood it. Of course they understood it. They'd seen The Lion King. The class I remember most vividly took place at an assisted living facility. There were 12 students, ages, let's say, 70 to 85. These people had experienced full lives. Many had lost spouses. Some had been married twice. A few had even outlived their own children. Others had recovered from strokes or heart attacks or were fighting cancer. They experienced personal triumphs and failures and regrets. They were living in a sense of borrowed time. How were they going to understand and live their lives while they still had time? The psychologist Erik Erikson called these questions the stage of ego integrity. Well, it was the best Hamlet class I've ever taught. I couldn't shut them up. They stayed after class. They wanted more. And having been bruised by life, old people's understanding of Hamlet is different than it is with 18-year-olds. Now, for the part you've all been waiting for, sex. This play should be rated R or at least PG-13. Direct and explicit references to sex ripple through the entire play. Hamlet's language and behavior can be raunchy, ribald, obscene, and shocking. Listen to this. Within a month, she married. Oh, most wicked speed, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. Hamlet is obsessed with detailed imaginings of her mother's sexual activities. Hear him raging at Gertrude, accusing her of sleeping with Claudius in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love. Children are generally curious but horrified by imagining their parents' sexual activities. Here, the usual boundaries between mother and son collapse. Some directors show him forcing her onto the bed, sitting astride her. Laurence Olivier had mother and son exchanging a juicy, passionate kiss. Hamlet snickers at his mother's age and stage. You cannot call it love, for at your age the heyday of blood is tame. He lectures her on how to withdraw from being sexually addicted to her new husband. Go not to my uncle's bed. Assume a virtue if you have it not. Refrain tonight, and that shall lend a kind of easiness to the next abstinence, and the next one will be more easy. I think we can agree that an adult child should not be giving his mother sex education. Although psychoanalysts have attempted to interpret Hamlet as living out an Oedipus complex, I believe that forcing Hamlet into a Freudian mold doesn't work. It's simpler to say that mother and son have become sensually enmeshed. Claudius resents their closeness. He says, she lives almost by his looks. Some directors showed Gertrude hesitating to return Claudius's affection while longingly gazing at her son. Now let's go back to the text. People are being seated to watch a performance of the traveling players. Gertrude says, "Come hither, my good Hamlet." Come hither? Is Mama being seductive or just looking for company? He turns away and scoots over to his girlfriend. No, good mother, here is metal more attractive. Trying to provoke Ophelia, he says, "Good lady, shall I lie in your lap?" Ophelia, "Oh no, my lord." Hamlet, "I mean my head upon your lap." Ophelia, "Aye, my lord." Hamlet, referring to the allegedly loose morals of country girls, "Do you think I meant country matters?" Ophelia, "I think nothing, my lord." Hamlet, "That's a fair thought, to lie between a maiden's legs." Ophelia is a very proper girl, but during her famous mad scene, she lets on she might not be as sexually naive as she seems. Listen to Ophelia's dirty ditty. By gifts and Saint Charity, alack, and fie for shame. Young men will do it if they come to it. By cock, they are all to blame. Perhaps Ophelia has a sexual imagination that lies beneath her innocence? So in conclusion, is it any wonder this play has been performed again and again? Why it has been a smash hit for 420 years? At any given time, there are several hundred productions of Hamlet taking place all over the world. It's been translated into 80 different languages. The Globe Theatre of London mounted a production of Hamlet and, incredibly, performed it in 93 countries over a 2-year period on 5 continents, from Berlin to Bangladesh to Bombay and Brisbane, for Syrian refugees and heads of state. Hamlet speaks to the human condition in our time and every time. So there you have it. There's something here for everyone. I hope this presentation will help those viewers who have a touch of bardophobia to approach the play with confidence. We've discussed uncertainty, appearance versus reality, phony mutuality in a family with a horrible secret. We viewed Hamlet as a man of many masks, a chameleon-like character. We've touched on the question of similarities and differences between faked and actual madness. We considered how madness and mental illness can be created by social norms. We discussed the famous Asch conformity experiment, which demonstrated that what we see and what we believe can be warped by social pressure. We've considered the omnipresence of mortality in Hamlet, in England, and in our own pandemic-ridden time. We tried to unpack the many meanings of the soliloquy and its connection to existentialism. Finally, we showed how sexuality ripples through Hamlet's relationship with his mother. I hope this discussion has enhanced your enjoyment of this remarkable play. Approaching Hamlet from a psychological and personal perspective may give you a new opportunity to appreciate this masterpiece and to see its relevance to the dramas of everyday life. Thank you.